In just about 15 minutes, we're expecting President Trump to make remarks and sign an executive order addressing police reform in the country. Joining us this morning to discuss the order, what's expected, and its overall goal is criminal defense attorney and KUSI contributor Vic Bajaj. Vic, good to see you this morning.
Likewise, good morning.
So let's talk about what's expected. We've heard from insiders who were briefed on Monday that it could create basically a national database for officers who use excessive force. It would allow grants for police departments to incorporate more mental health officials within law enforcement agencies. What is your initial take as a criminal defense attorney on some of the measures that are likely to be proposed this morning?
Well, first of all, extraordinarily overdue. The biggest challenge we have as defense attorneys and some civil litigators who file civil rights violations in both state and federal court is being able to adequately track the history of law enforcement officers that may be involved in that case or cause. Here we have a case we've talked about before on your channel, the Pitches case from the 1970s in California, which really opens up a paradigm and a framework from which we operate in order to gain the history of disciplinary actions for the police officers that may be involved in that case or cause. The problem is, as a litigator, as a defense attorney, for instance, if there's an officer that we believe used excessive force, we have to know so much information about that officer, such as where they worked beforehand, and we need to know specifically what it is that we're asking for. It's a unique art. What the Trump administration has done here in a very proactive way is provided the funding so there can be an infrastructure available to litigators, both on the civil rights side and on the criminal defense side, to be able to navigate these waters. What it will end up doing, if it works out correctly and as planned by the Trump administration, is create a federal database. So Officer Joe Friendly, for instance, who may be at issue, we would be able to find out everything about Officer Friendly's history and if there were any disciplinary actions or excessive force. It streamlines the process. It makes the information much more accessible to those that need it. So long overdue and extraordinarily quick action by the administration.
Congressional Democrats and Republicans are said to be working on their own separate bills as well. Would today's action basically make it so that there's no need for their bills to be introduced, or would that still happen? Could Democrats feel that maybe his executive order today doesn't go far enough?
Well, that may be an answer not regarding the practical nature of the effect, but more the political nature of the effect. Putting aside the Democrats versus the Republicans and the administration and what they are doing, if we have a chance in the very near future to examine the text of the executive order, it may very well do away with any of the partisanship to present their own plans and programs. We have understood through some spokespeople through the administration that this is quite exhaustive, not only including issues of excessive force or lying on police reports or any kind of investigatory findings, but also training officers on the use of force, the chokehold, and things of that nature. But most importantly, what we have to understand is in a lot of the cases where law enforcement officers with excellent intentions, when they're involved with allegations of excessive force, we are coming to find out that they're dealing with those who may be suffering from significant psychological issues, mental health disorders, and drug or alcohol addiction disorders.
Yeah, I think
so this administration's law allows those to be put forward to properly train the law enforcement officers.
Yeah, and to keep up the evaluations of officers throughout their time working in law enforcement, which I think is critical as well, as we've heard from a number of people on both sides of this issue. I want to talk to, and I hope I'm not asking you to step too outside of your realm, but perhaps you've dealt with police unions before in any of your cases. I wonder how that relationship between police departments and unions is perhaps going to be affected and looked at, because I recall hearing from the chief of police in Minneapolis, him saying, I've had situations where I've had cause to get rid of an officer that I felt was a bad apple, if you will, and later to be reinstated by a union. So where does that relationship come into play here?
Well, that's an extraordinary, astute question, and I'm glad you brought it up. And I would say this: police unions, like other unions throughout the United States, are very powerful in a number of ways. Number one, it provides an umbrella to protect those participants, whether it's grocery store workers or whether it's petroleum workers, or in this case, law enforcement officers. The real problem when it sifts down into what we have to deal with on the streets, when we put our finger on the pulse of it, we come to find out quickly that the practical issue is the power, the political power, and the voting influence that these unions have. It would be an extraordinary step for the police unions to lose that type of leverage. And this is really calling upon politicians to extraordinarily pressure these unions to change their ways and their own logistics on how they handle disciplinary procedures. The unions are there primarily to protect their own participants, in this case, law enforcement officers. The problem is it's very hard to discipline participants who are contributing to the union's coffers. So there's a lot of protectionism that we see in these types of cases. It really comes down to the politicians and whether they are willing to take heed and sort of listen to or acquiesce in regards to the police union's influence. It's a question of police union influence and dissecting that and allowing this information to seep through the union's filter and then make its way into the public view.
Vic, as always, appreciate your insight, and certainly we can analyze it more after we get a look at this morning's executive order, but appreciate your time and insight this morning as always.
My pleasure. Thank you so much.
Take care, Vic.